Hello everyone, we're going to do a quick little walkthrough of the central nervous system as far as what you're seeing in lab. So I'm not going to go through the fissures and the different gyri or the lobes. I think those are easy to find in the cadaver lab. But here we have a sagittal cut of the head, really it's the cranial portion. I wanted to kind of outline these areas for you. So here's the corpus callosum. And below this region, you would normally find a hole or space here, and that would be the lateral ventricle. Now we have two lateral ventricles, and so now we're going to kind of draw this out if we were like looking on top of the brain on these lateral ventricles. So we have two of them, and then when they butt up next to each other, there's a wall that's created here. And this wall is called the septum pellucidum. It's a thin tissue, connective tissue, that's sitting between those two spaces. So that's what we're seeing here, the septum pellucidum. Below that area we have the fornix, okay, which would be the two hippocampus structures coming together. That creates the fornix here. Below that area we can see the oval or egg-shaped structure that would be the thalamus. Now the thalamus as well has that little interthalamic adhesion, as well has a little space that sits between the two thalami. So here's one thalamus on the left, here's one on the right, and that interthalamic adhesion helps the two communicate with one another. So this space that's created here between those two, here and here, that is going to be our third ventricle. Now, this thalamus will help you locate this triangular shaped hypothalamus, okay? And that hypothalamus, if you look below this area here, here's the stalk of the pituitary gland. And the pituitary gland, of course, is sitting within the sella turcica. And anterior to that, you're going to see the optic nerve, which I'm outlining right now. There's our optic nerve. And then posterior to the stalk of the pituitary gland, you're going to find a mammillary body. Remember, that's a part of our limbic system. Other structures you can see here is going to be the cerebral aqueduct, and that leads to the fourth ventricle here. And now let's talk about the brainstem. This area in here is going to be the midbrain. Okay, and then we have the pons, located right there, and our medulla, which once it passes the foramen magnum here, then it becomes the spinal cord. And back in here would be the cerebellum, and we could see the arbor vitae right in here. That would be all of the white matter. And I believe that's all the structures that I would test you on the practical. Let's move into our next slide. Now here's a coronal cut through the cerebrum, and this highlighted portion is going to be the thalamus. You also have the corpus callosum here. This is part of our lateral ventricle, and this would be the caudate nucleus. And then this here, let me outline this portion. This here would be our lenticulate nucleus. Lentiform nucleus. And I mentioned to some of you guys this is broken up into two different parts. We have the putamen here, and then the rest of this would be the globitus pallidus. But you guys don't have to know those two different parts. But this lentiform nucleus, along with the caudate nucleus, that is going to be a part of the basal nuclei. And I forgot to mention that this space is the third ventricle. Okay, now let's talk about the meninges. This portion, this half-moon shaped structure, is the falx cerebri, and this area is where we would find that tentorium cerebelli coming out toward you. So this highlighted portion is the falx cerebri. So you can kind of see that they've removed these brain structures down in here, so you could see the tentorium cerebelli moving into the opposite direction. And this is a couple different views of our ventricles. This would be our lateral ventricle all in here. So this is a transverse cut through the head. anterior and posterior here. So all of this is a lateral ventricle here. This in here would also be our lateral ventricle, and then this here. These are just different levels of cuts, so we're only seeing certain portions. Our third ventricle, like we kind of saw in the other picture, that's the third ventricle. The thalamus would be located alongside of this, and also it's the space medial to the thalamus in this image. And then we see the fourth ventricle, which would be anterior to the cerebellum and posterior to the pons. That's highlighted in orange. And these are just more views of that lateral ventricle, but in this case we can see that choroid plexus left in place. So remember, that's a network of capillaries that's going to help create the cerebrospinal fluid. And here's our third ventricle again. So now let's talk about the circle of Willis. Remember that blood is moving in through the vertebral arteries, then it flows into the basilar artery, which you see highlighted here over the pons, and then that is going to give rise to our posterior cerebral artery. So that would be kind of flowing on back this way. We don't see it too well. I see it better over here. That's your posterior cerebral artery. Your posterior communicating is moving on up toward here. This would be your middle cerebral artery going off to the sides. The one that's facing you that you see cut open, that's the internal carotid artery. And then we see our anterior cerebral artery moving on in this way, and this connection between the two is the anterior communicating artery. And these are just close-ups of each of these vessels. So this image, sorry it's a little bloody here, it's the only one I could find that truly represented what your cadaver looked like when you looked into the cranium. So I wanted to kind of give you an idea where these cranial nerves are found. So here's my little box that I always talk about. And in these anterior corners, here's your optic nerve here. I really should have chose a different color, huh? Here's your optic nerve, cranial nerve number 2. Okay. And let's switch colors so everything doesn't blend in together. And then posterior to that, you're going to find this guy here, your internal carotid artery. In the center, you have your pituitary gland, and then it's missing on this side, but we see it here. This is your oculomotor nerve. So you can also see it in this image here. There's your oculomotor nerve. It's in the lower part of that box area. Okay, now that abducent nerve I was talking about in our prep screencast, that's right over here in that middle portion. You guys see this little strand here? That's cranial nerve number 6. Cranial nerve number 5, you can't really see it in here. It's probably underneath this flap here. And you can't even see the internal acoustic too well, I just realized, but that would be more in this region here, actually. Yeah. The reason I know that for sure this one is jugular foramen is because I see this strand moving on down. You could see it here too. I know that's a branch off of the accessory nerve, so that for sure has to be my jugular foramen, consisting of cranial nerves 9, 10, and 11. So in this diagram, here's trigeminal, here's the internal acoustic meatus with 7 and 8, and this down here would be jugular foramen with cranial nerves 9, 10, and 11. And then hypoglossal is pretty deep in here. It would be located on the side here. You can kind of see part of it back in here. That would be your hypoglossal canal with your hypoglossal nerve. So I hope that helps a little bit. Please let me know if you'd like this on anything else. I'll try and find some more photos for you.